When everything is marketing and marketing is everything, taglines and trends are just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. On the M Word, we're talking marketing and mission and the pursuit of what's personal. I'm your host, Jennifer Mulchandani, and you are listening to the M Word podcast presented by Arlington Strategy. Today, I'm talking with Christopher Fox, CEO and founder of Ideas-Led Growth, about thought leadership, innovation, and promoting the good societal impacts of technological advancement. With a PhD in French literature and a former academic, Chris is a communications and marketing strategist, ghostwriter, and mentor who helps people who have a passion for change to develop and deliver messages that influence and inspire. He works with founders and C-level executives in fintech and financial services organizations of all sizes. He also helps entrepreneurs increase their presence and impact in the communities they serve. Enjoy today's conversation. Chris, I'm so glad you're here for the M Word today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, when we chatted to get ready for today, I was prepping you. I said, sometimes we get into, where in our journey did we fall down or hit a wall? And you're like, mine was right from the start. I have a PhD in French literature, and I don't do that anymore.
Right.
So why don't you catch everybody up? What do you do, and how did you get here?
Yeah, so what I do currently, and I've had my business in place since 2007, is I'm the founder and managing partner of a firm called Ideas-Led Growth. And what we do is we work with companies that are looking to grow while changing their industries for the better. The almost exclusive focus at this point is in the area that I would call hard institutional finance. So things like derivatives and hedge funds and big institutional banks and fintech innovators that are providing services to financial institutions. It's really within that category, which very much fits the profile of companies that are working to change the industries where they work. Some other clients that I do occasionally work with will be in other areas. So, within finance, we talk about fintech. In education, it's ed tech. In sustainability, it's climate tech. It's sort of anything tech, but that's really the profile of the companies that we work with to help them really dig out and surface their best ideas, their best thinking, deliver that thinking through marketing channels, through premium thought leadership, through other types of marketing content, and using that as one of the key mechanisms that they grow externally within their market, but also grow internally by creating a shared sense of purpose and values around, well, what is it that we're really doing, committing ourselves to as far as change and the vision of better that we have and that we're advocating for in the world with the offering that we're building.
Okay, I want to unpack this a little bit because and not play devil's advocate. It's more like devil's ignorant here.
Sure.
When you talk about these sort of tech behemoths in whether it's finance, health, environment, and so on, align this for me with, because, your own ethos, your bio talks about working with people who really want positive change in the world, like the good guys. So
right.
So you're telling me that these big bad industries are the good guys?
Yeah, in many ways they can be. If you look at the way things happen in the world in general, it's kind of like it or not, we live in a primarily capitalist global economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could say, well, you're just doing a lot of justification after the fact, or you really believe this is true. But finance is one of the mechanisms for making things happen. And finance can make very bad things happen, like resource extraction, human exploitation, all sorts of genuinely terrible things. Finance can also make very good things happen, where investment funds focus on sustainability. They focus on removing climate risk from their portfolios. They deliver social innovations. They give people who have no access to any kind of financial services, savings, lending, things that are really valuable conveniences for just getting by in an economy. There are well over 1 billion people that don't have access to any such thing. And some of these innovators are delivering services to the unbanked. So that's lots of different, it's kind of like the mosaic of ways in which some of these technology companies are helping make things better and how some of these financial investment companies are making things better. It's always a mixed bag. It's not perfect. My sense is that it's generally tending in a direction of better than it used to be. But it's a valid question. And I typically tend to work with those clients that have at least something in their portfolio that's improving access to financial systems, that's investing in a greener and better world, that's doing something other than just truly exploitative, like let's buy a company, strip it for parts, and then sell it and fire everyone. Like those are not the companies I'm doing business with.
Right. Well, I feel, a kinship in a way with you, that we tend to attract the type of values in our clients that we exude as a business, right? And I think this idea of using marketing to achieve something positive I love talking about it, because I think marketing as a whole sort of gets this rap of like spin or smoke and mirrors, and let's make up something good to say so people feel good about it, as opposed to the genuine underlying behavior that the business we're trying to market is actually doing, and telling that story and helping people understand that there's good people in this world, and they run businesses, and they can use their business for a public good.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I do love it. Do you see it from your perspective? Do you see it changing or growing, or sort of like more understanding from the business guys that this is actually marketable stuff?
Very much so. Very much so. And marketable at lots of different levels. So there's definitely a marketability factor for investing in sustainability or investing in positive social impact. It also as our culture is evolving and changing, it helps attract talent. So it also helps companies grow in that sense. But even more convenience factor things that can really make a big difference. Like, why on earth does it take 3 or 4 days for a check to clear? And why is it that it's typically worse for people with smaller balances than with bigger balances? There are some legitimate reasons why that happens, just given the way the banking system is set up and the way transactions clear through financial systems. The idea that even something that seems like, well, it's just a convenience, what if there's an innovator that makes that process go faster? Well, if you're sitting there on a due date, the difference between paying a bill late and having a late fee or paying it on time, because this check is just going through the very slow, rusty pipes of the financial system, even there, someone who is improving that creates a better financial life for people that you might not really be thinking of as a benefit in a traditional sustainability or social impact perspective, but it really makes a difference in their financial lives.
It's so true. I mean, we work a lot in the social services space with nonprofits, and like the difference between people, defaulting on, rent or car. It's so little what most people keep in there, have access to in cash, that those little bits really do matter. That's very interesting. So I want to hear more about your own journey, though, because
there's a loop we need to close.
PhD in French literature, and I will use the sum total of the French I can remember from all those years. Ooh la la! No, qu'est-ce que c'est? Do you lean on that? So, like, the fact you were in academia, that is sort of this idea of thought leadership, which I want to dive into more in the marketing sense. But like, do you think that has, for you, derived from this academic underpinning that you have?
I would say yes, not directly. I'm never or very rarely am I talking with my clients about Proust or Balzac or Zola or any of the kind of the big well-known names in French literature. But what I do bring from that past life is the ability to handle lots of very complex information. Graduate level literary studies, you're reading all of the primary literary texts, you're reading all the secondary literature, the analysis, the history, the culture around it. There's so much complex and nuanced input that you take in to understand the details of your field of study. And that was something that I very intentionally, when I chose not to be in academia anymore, one of the most horrifying things about it was like, oh my gosh, I've invested so much time and so much energy in this thing that on the surface is absolutely not transferable and not usable in the private sector and in the business world at all. But what could I do in a sense to turn it inside out and find things that I can use the skills and the talent that I built over time in the academic environment as advantages in the business world. And so that ability to just plow through a lot of stuff and being able to figure out what does it all mean and then communicate that in a way that's coherent and meaningful on the research side has been a huge advantage. And that's a core of what I do every single day and have been doing for many, many years. The other aspect of it, of course, is the teaching aspect. And I think there are a lot of parallels between consulting and teaching. Because at least a lot of the ways that I do things with my clients, I'm helping them learn things and assimilate things that they can then apply in their own contexts. And so some of that experience in just working with people to help them understand something, but then also do something with that understanding was another piece of the puzzle where in going through this whole internal process of turning my entire education and skill set inside out, that was one of the other things that came from the inside and now sits on the outside is a very teaching oriented way to doing consulting, especially because many of the projects and relationships that I have, it's not just developing the marketing materials, but there's a change management aspect. We're actually changing the way that we think internally as a company. And then in turn, we're trying to help our clients think differently. So that's my clients that are in that position of their internal staff need to think about things differently sometimes. And then they need to help their clients think about things differently so that they're positioning their solutions as an ideal fit for a new way of looking at a problem that may have been in place for many, many years.
Yeah, and I also think there's got to be some relatability. Like when you're consulting with clients, you're dealing with people who have like every level of risk tolerance, right? You've got people who are completely risk averse, and you have those who are, like you clearly went through by going through that sort of personal metamorphosis, like that could be seen as like a massive risk taking to sort of you've made changes for yourself, and that's got to give you credibility with your clients.
I'm sure there is a degree to that I've sort of been through it before, and I've been through tough personal transformations and tough professional transformations, and sometimes even just having those, it's a terrible metaphor, but those notches in my belt, so to speak, of like, all right, well, you've been out there and you've engaged in some pretty challenging changes successfully. So yes, I think the way that you're describing it is it's actually really interesting. It does resonate with me.
Yeah. So let's dive into a little bit about what this thought leadership is. This is a term, I mean, we use it in marketing all the time as if everybody knows what this means, and people I think have ascribed their own understanding to what it is. And it's poignant to me that you talk about, like, if you spend too much time on LinkedIn, then you're getting further and further away from what thought leadership actually is.
Right.
So what do you mean by that? And where do you go from there if you're not like living and breathing LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, thought leadership, I don't want to give a whole history lesson here, but I'm going to hit a couple of high points that have happened over the past, let's say pre, during, and post pandemic. So pre-pandemic, thought leadership could often be a bit of a tough sell. Well, why do we want to do this? That sounds hard. Let's just focus on product marketing and getting our materials out there and do some emails and some things like that. During the pandemic, there was this huge surge in thought leadership because all of a sudden, all of those in-person interactions that companies could have with their prospects to talk at a very relevant and deep and nuanced level about a solution and what that solution offers and what the advantages of that solution might be, all of that went away. You couldn't just appear as a panelist at an industry event. You couldn't go network. You couldn't do any of that stuff. The one thing that you could do is send people content, and that content could be white papers, longer articles, webinars, whatever kind of digital content was available. That was all you had for several months. That went on for quite a while between when people first did that hard stop, no more traveling, to slowly being willing to do it when once it was allowed, doing it a little bit, doing a little bit more, and now we're sort of back to normal, but it's a different normal where there's still a lot of desire to publish and distribute more types of content. So I've gone through that little history lesson, first of all, to put some context around what I'm going to say, which is that thought leadership used to be kind of a niche approach in marketing. All of a sudden it surged and now everyone wants to do it. And that's why everyone is talking about it in LinkedIn. And that's why there are so many different definitions of it. You could walk away from LinkedIn thinking that thought leadership is just content that says what you think. Or some people it's just longer content that's harder to read. Right? It starts to become very trivialized. I have a very specific and focused definition of thought leadership. And in some ways it's quite simple, which is that thought leadership is content that takes both the thinking and the leading seriously. In other words, it really explores the nuances and the implications of trends and situations within a very focused industry context. It describes the situation and the causes of that situation in ways that are innovative and insightful that people might not have thought of before. But the other piece of the puzzle is that thought leadership is content that needs to have some relevance to the reader's decision-making process. If I'm a buyer of a large institutional platform that helps me run my hedge fund, or that helps me issue stocks more easily if I'm a private company, or any of these big financial decisions that companies make, one of the best ways to win my business is to change the way I think about the problem that I have. And that's the leadership aspect of it. It's not just, oh, here's some interesting thoughts about cryptocurrency and why is it happening. It's much more about how can you then take what's happening in that space, rethink it, and then apply it to your business so that you become a client of the firm that's offering you that thought leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting because bringing it back to kind of the example you were given around, a technology advancement in how, handwritten checks get processed or something simple like that.
Right.
The people who came up with that technology might not have been thinking of the problem it was solving. For some people, they were thinking of maybe inefficiency or whatever, solving other problems that were more obvious to them. But in thought leadership, it would be doing the thinking, coming up with the extra benefits, redefining, repositioning in a way that is bigger than the obvious sort of bells and whistles or solution providing. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like as the thought leader, one, it's unique. It's not recycling of ideas. It's thought leadership is not like great article, this really resonated. That's not thought leadership. Thought leadership
No,
is your unique interpretation and application of an idea, right?
I think that's right. I think that's exactly it.
I love it. It makes it harder to do, though.
It is it is much harder to do that. And it's harder to do because this again comes back to it. It's also hard to understand a piece of literature written in the 18th century in its full historical and cultural and social and economic context.
Mm-hmm,
Same
mm-hmm.
thing. It's also really hard if you're building a payments platform that here's an example of a company that I spoke with recently. They have a platform that helps African women who want to be content creators create their content and get revenue from it. Guess what? Most of the platforms like YouTube and the other big platforms don't allow you to do transactions or payments in those local currencies. So what are these people to do? Right? So they need some degree of financial innovation to be able to derive financial benefit from the content that they're creating. So they're creating this platform, but you have to understand all of the different dynamics that go into that. And of course, many of these people, they're using only mobile devices. They don't have a desktop setup. They don't
Mm-hmm.
have a fancy video setup at home. They're using a smartphone to do these things. So you have to make sure that the platform is mobile enabled and it's connected. And you start to think about all of these different nuances and implications of it's an overused term in the B2B world, but an ecosystem is a very complex mechanism or a very complex
Mm-hmm.
environment with a lot of moving and living parts. Sometimes I think the metaphor is actually fairly apt to talk about things like a financial ecosystem as
Mm-hmm.
well, because there are lots of different types of living entities that are all living and working together within that particular situation.
Right. That's so fascinating. In a way, I feel like thought leadership is somewhat academic sounding, right? Because what you're describing is really, it's it's innovating. It's just at the core, it's business, it's problem solving, it's
Yeah,
innovation. And with some marketing thrown in that you communicate the innovation.
that's
Uh,
right. The way that you're describing that, one of the other things that I'd love to talk about a little bit is so as my business evolved, I mentioned earlier that I started this company in 2007, and I
mhm,
started it with the name Syncrasys. It's very precious, very obscure. It's based on an ancient Greek word. It's used only a few times in all of ancient Greek literature. One of the times it's used is by Aristotle that talks about the process of reconciling different and competing perspectives. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I love to do. And I'm going to call my company Syncrasys. Well, a few things. No one ever knew what that meant. Why would they? It's not like I expected they would. I just hadn't really imagined some of these things. Well, they're not going to know what it means. So it's just a weird word for them. No one could spell it. No one could pronounce it. It was kind of just like, all right, it's this thing that I've got now. And when I was just working on thought leadership, it was a good name and I got a lot of commercial traction from it. Just this year, I changed the name of my company. And here's the point. I changed the name of my company to Ideas Led Growth. And the reason why is that I really wanted to emphasize that connection between it's not just thought leadership for the sake of writing in-depth and interesting content. It's really about thought leadership as the fulcrum of all of this other innovation that happens. And communicating those ideas is only one piece. So, the first place you have to start is generating those ideas, and then you have to change the way your business works around those
right.
ideas. And you can't just have an idea, you have to act on the idea to build something, build credibility. If it's technology, maybe it's a proof of concept. If it's some kind of service innovation, you still have to prove out the idea. And
Mm-hmm.
you got to do all that homework first before you have anything that's substantive or meaningful to communicate. And then you need to use the communication of that idea in order to expand your business, expand your market, gain new
Right.
clients, get into new potentially related areas, all of those different things. And so that's why kind of like the realization that you just had about, well, thought leadership, it sounds like in many ways it's just innovation. It kind of is. It's
Yeah.
really the place where innovation becomes visible, but there are a lot of things that go into what happens before that
Right.
innovation becomes visible around, taking those ideas, surfacing them,
Hmm.
getting them to gel, and then finally you have something to share.
Right. And get buy-in. It's got
Right.
to resonate
Right.
with
Buy in
people.
with the market, buy in with internal people too. You have to,
Yeah.
if you're a larger company and you're rethinking something that you've already been doing, there's internal employee communication that thought leadership also is an important mechanism for.
Right. So as evolve your business and your own journey, what does success mean for you? What does it look like?
So success means continuing to be able to solve the hard problems in ways that are interesting, and that, I am personally motivated by being a little bit ahead of the curve. So pre-pandemic, when I was talking a lot, advocating hard for thought leadership, that was a little bit ahead of the curve at that time. And I felt that, it's a combination of, yes, you have to do that extra work to convince your clients why it's valuable, but it's also very satisfying in that you're doing that transformation. And now that I've elevated the idea of thought leadership into ideas-led growth, again, it's like that's a little bit of a hard sell. You have to talk through the concept and make sure that clients really get it before they come on board, and then they want to work with you forever. So materially, what does success mean? It means long-term high revenue client relationships. That's how, in a more practical sense, how my business ticks. I am working with clients that I've had in place for 7 years, 10 years.
Hmm.
Last year, a client that I'd been doing business with since 2007 ended up going away because they were acquired and then acquired and then acquired again. It was finally the last big fish that ate all the other small fish that said, no, we have our own provider, our own way of doing things. But, from 2007 to 2023, that's a very long client relationship. And that's a big part of the success for me, is that it's the length and the quality of the relationships. I know these things don't have a lot to do with financial success, but it's about rapport, it's about trust, it's about transformation. And if I'm doing that work, this is a little bit of the sort of woo-woo mystical side of me. Like, I know the revenue just comes.
Yeah. I hear that from a lot of business owners. It's the other parts that when those work, then the revenue follows, or the profit.
Yeah. So it's easy to say for me that success isn't defined by revenue, because I have the good fortune of, being in a good place with the revenue. I might say something different, and I probably would have said something different when I was really working to build that client portfolio,
Mhm.
and revenue was a much more visible piece of the success. But now it's much more, I'd say it's rapport over revenue.
That's great. Well, to bring this to an end, um, if folks want to hear more of your thought leadership on thought leadership, or get help in that area, where do they find you?
So the best place to find me would be on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as Christopher Fox. There are several people by that name, so you look for Christopher Fox,
And
Ideas
we'll
Led
have the link
Growth.
in the show notes too.
Great, great. So follow that link. I'm very open to having people connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I publish lots of insights and just, kind of offhand thoughts regularly on LinkedIn. So come find me there. And then the other thing that you can easily find on LinkedIn, and perhaps in the show notes as well, is I have a newsletter that comes out at this point twice a month, where I go much deeper into some of these um, more expanded ideas around thought leadership and how to grow using finding and using the value of your ideas.
Love it. And we will definitely link the newsletter there too.
Perfect.
So before I let you go, Chris, and I warned you this was coming,
You did.
Barbie or Ken?
Barbie or Ken? I mean, I'm sure in some ways there people will expect me to say Ken, but no, I think Barbie. I'm going to go by the movie rather than the toys. Movie version of Barbie is way more like me in terms of, I'm the person that will get out of my box and go explore the world and be surprised by everything, and ideally have a real impact on, all of my clients are at least aspirationally the America Ferreras that I rub off on, and they will eventually give their highly motivated speech that's tied to the message that they got from me. So I think in that ways I'm much more the Barbie, the multifaceted, inspirational, going out into the world figure than the Ken figure.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for sharing your perspective. This has been a lot of fun and a lot of this has been a great learning opportunity for me to hear sort of all of these ideas and concepts have been, it's great to dive into it and give ourselves and our listeners the space to think about thought leadership in a different paradigm. So thank you for sharing and for taking the time today.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the great questions. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Me too, Chris. Thanks. Thanks for listening to The M Word. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Subscribe and never miss a podcast. Visit arlingtonstrategy.com for more. The M Word is an Arlington Strategy production hosted by Jennifer Mulchandani. Our theme music is by Moochie. Graphic design by Kayla Fagan and Emily Rare. Sound engineering and editing by Winston Turner.